Hello, my name is Brian Lewis and I'm an instructor at the Tennessee Job Training and Safety Program over in Public Works. Today we're going to talk about utility work zone traffic control. However, before we get started, I would like to ask you to pause the video and discuss any near misses or accidents you might have had. Have a good discussion. Try to find any kind of solutions that you can so that a near miss or the accident doesn't happen again. It doesn't basically repeat itself. After you've had the discussion, go ahead and hit play and continue the presentation. Thank you. Hopefully you've had a good discussion, and now we're going to talk about utility work zone traffic control and our presentation. Portions of this program were taken from Management and Safety Officials module developed by Wayne State University and Bradley University. It's important to give people credit where credit is due. So, utility work zone is different than a normal work zone. Yes, I'm sure most of you all know that. Typically shorter duration. It requires more time to set up and remove traffic control than to complete the work in a lot of cases, and that's a really key component. If it takes more time to set up than to complete the work, we've got an issue here. And the reason we have an issue is because you are at more risk typically when you're setting up a work zone than when you are working in the work zone. So we in safety are all about reducing risk. So keep that in mind. A lot of times what we're doing on a utility job site is unplanned. A lot of times it's away from travel. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it does require less traffic control. Sometimes there's a smaller work crew, and same work crew attends multiple work sites. So in other words, you might get called off a work site to go visit and control issues at another work site. What do passing motorists need? They need early recognition, clear recognition of potential hazards, and drivers need to be expected to maintain through the work zone. This is really important. Just like when we talk about anything else in safety and health, we talk about early recognition, being able to see what issues are at hand and how to address them. And our communication needs to be clear. When we talk about communication, we often talk about the person who is doing the communicating, the medium that the communication is being transmitted in, and then the receiver. And there's actually a lot of room for confusion. So we want to be clear, concise, professional as much as we can. This will help keep you safe and keep the drivers or road users' frustration at a minimum. The Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, or MUTCD, recognizes that shorter times are spent in utility work zones. There are some limitations that are real practical limitations of site-specific infrastructure, and normal roadway construction work zone might not be applicable to what's going on in a utility zone. So that's important to keep that in mind. The MUTCD does describe and talk about this kind of issue with utilities. So there's 5 categories of work duration. There is a long-term stationary, an intermediate-term stationary, short-term stationary, short duration, and then mobile. Long-term stationary work is work that is going to be or occupy a location for more than 3 days. And intermediate stationary work occupies a location for more than 1 daylight period, up to 3 days. So that's important to keep those things in mind. Do utilities conduct work in this type of time frame? Sure they do, but it's not often and it's not typical. Typically, it's a much shorter duration. Short-term stationary is daytime work that occupies a location for more than 1 hour in a single daylight period. Short duration work that occupies a location for up to an hour. Mobile is work that moves continuously or intermittently. Typically, for mobile, it's very quick and it's fast moving, and because of that, it takes special considerations. I think most time utilities are going to spend their time in the short-term stationary and the short duration work, typically, because you're actually trying to correct emergency type or immediately requires a situation that immediately requires attention. So breaks and things like that. Short duration work, you got to have the right colors, you got to have marked vehicles with high intensity lights, and you have to have signs to channel or move the road users in the correct direction. So we talk about an awful lot about the type of colors that we use, and typically we use colors that are not found in nature. So if you look around in nature, what you will find is that there are a lot of browns, a lot of greens, different shades of grays. That's why typically you see yellows, yellow greens, orange reds, and strong fluorescent versions of those colors. You see those because it's not normal to see them in nature, and it provides a lot of contrast. That's why signs look the way they do. That's why they have the reflectorized backgrounds that they do. And it's important that we maintain that contrast. That helps keep us visible to the road users. Short duration work, it's simply a simplified control procedures may be warranted for short duration work. A reduction in the normal of devices may be offset by the use of other more dominant devices such as high intensity, rotating, flashing, oscillating, or strobe lights. Pretty straightforward. If you have lights, especially high intensity lights, that are going to grab the road user's attention, then you can use those devices, and it may be the appropriate thing to do instead of some other more complicated road signs and a more complicated work zone setup. Risk factors that you have to take into consideration when you're doing your plan, your work zone plan. And this is a good time where we can talk about job briefings, because job briefings are wonderful places where we can talk about all the safety factors we need to discuss. And if you're going to be exposed to traffic, this is absolutely a place where you want to discuss the risk of utility work when you're exposed to traffic. So you've got to think about what kind of volume is on the roadway, how fast do people, one, are they required to go by, in other words, the speed limit, and do they obey the speed limit? Different places in different communities have different enforcement of the speed limits, and because of that, you may actually have people traveling quite a bit faster than what the speed limit is. So you got to take those things into consideration. The lateral distance from travel lanes is important. Work duration, how long is it going to take you? How long do you anticipate it taking you to complete the work? If it's going to be relatively quick, you have to offset how much time you're going to be working versus how much time you're going to be setting up your temporary traffic control zone or your work zone. So if it's going to take you 45 minutes to set up the work zone to do 15 minutes worth of work, you may be increasing your risk, your exposure to traffic, by setting up the work zone instead of using a more simplified way to identify that you're there, that you're working, and that road users need to pay attention to what's going on. Something we often talk about when we talk about traffic control is sight distance and work area visibility. A lot of times we talk about blind hills, blind curves, unkept shrubs, trees, that will hide a flagger or partially hide a vehicle in high intensity lights. So we absolutely want to take into consideration sight distance and work area visibility. The number one cause of problems with flaggers and the number one cause of accidents is sight distance to the work zone, identifying people who are working and exposed to traffic. So there are going to be times when you need to look at the site, and if there's a blind curve, a blind hill, or other things that cause issues with sight distance and visibility to the workers, you may need to adjust your work zone, may need to make sure that the flagger or the lights or your devices are visible. There's other factors that contribute to this as well, like weather, rain, sleet, snow, fog, and there's several others. All these are important to keep into consideration because utility work doesn't always happen when it's 75 degrees, blue skies, low wind, high visibility. There's a lot of times when it's really nasty outside. That's when people at utilities go to work. So we've got to keep that in mind. Prevention of work zone crashes, that's important. It's one of the number one things that we want to look at. We want to look at the work site. We want to look at the traffic patterns. We want to look at the plan that we've put in place for the work zone in our job briefings. And if you have some other plan, we want to make sure that we take all those things into consideration. We want to make sure that we position devices, including work vehicles, to create an obstacle, right? We want to prevent oncoming traffic from hitting people in the work zone. So early recognition of utility work zone by motorists, it's really important. We want them to be able to take action to avoid traffic crashes. We want them to recognize the risk that's presented to them. We want to make sure we provide information about potential hazards. Along those lines, we don't want to lie to them either. So when we leave the work zone, we want to make sure our signs and our devices are protected or hidden or taken down so that we're not lying to motorists. We want to make sure the information that we provide through the devices, cones, drums, barriers, etc. are appropriate. So the basic requirement for traffic control devices, they do fill a need. They command attention. Hopefully they convey a clear, simple meaning. Hopefully they command respect from road users. And hopefully they give adequate time for proper responses. This is what we're aiming to do when we talk about our traffic control devices. We are aiming to give adequate time for a proper response. And because that's our end goal, we want to command respect. We want the communication that we're using to be clear, simple, straightforward. We want to give directions with authority. We want to be pleasant in our work. We want to be professional, but we must be authoritative when we're exposed to traffic. That's really important. Temporary traffic control signs, portable signs that we put up. We want to make sure that we reduce work duration and exposure to risk. Putting the signage lower to the ground may produce a greater impact on the driving population. We have to take these things into consideration. Comparison of the mounting techniques. Drivers tend to look at the pavement in front of them, so they tend to be looking down instead of up in the sky. 4 degrees better than 12 degrees cone vision. Easier recognition of the work zone when signs are mounted different than typical signs. Anything that you can do to provide contrast, not just colors, but also variations in how you present the signs can make a difference in gaining the road user's attention. So we want to make sure that we do what we can to make sure road users understand what's in front of them and that they recognize that they have a responsibility a responsibility to treat the workers in that area with respect. So here's some examples of some poorly mounted signs. As you can see, they're either hidden, or they're not well placed, or they're not well maintained, and they do not convey good messages. They really do not show a professionalism that is needed, as well as conveying the clear messages we've talked about. They show very little authoritative value. So we want to make sure we show that that there is professionalism, that there is authority, and that the message we're trying to send is clear and concise. That's always important. Here's some other sample work zone warning signs. The top two lines you can see are for utility work zone applications, and then below those top two lines, some other work zone applications. If I am moving too fast, I do not mean to move too fast through this presentation. I try to slow down as quick or as much as I can and not move quickly. However, in watching this video, if you need to look at these signs more closely, please pause the video at any point and do what you need to do to become familiar with any of these signs you're not familiar with. Taller cones are important. Use orange cones with retro-reflectorized or reflective bands. Now, when we talk about retro-reflective bands, all we are really meaning is that when a light source hits that retro-reflectorized tape or band, that the light bounces back and returns to the source. It's very important. We're talking about headlights here, right? So anything that's retro-reflectorized is going to reflect that light back to the direction and the angle it came from, and because of that, it makes it more noticeable to road users. They're preferred over normal traffic cones. They increase the visibility and gain attention of the road users. They're easily transported. They're easily and quickly installed and removed on site, and anything you can do to decrease the amount of time that you're setting up a work zone is going to lower your risk, and that's what's important here, right? So warning lights on vehicles, they do grab attention. Make sure that they're clean and that the high intensity lights are working correctly. Sufficient time for taking appropriate reaction. Warning light standardization is desirable. It's important that people understand what the lights they're looking at and what they inform them of. Promote driver understanding, and they see work vehicles. It's important to keep the lights clean, make sure they're working properly, make sure the vehicles are clean. There again, contrast is our friend. Contrast is our friend. Dirty vehicles, dirty lights, dirty signs, dirty class 2 or 3 vest or whatever reflective vest you're using are the enemy of lowering our risk. They're the enemy of lowering our risk. We want our risk to be as low as possible. The cleaner the devices and equipment are, the more likely you're going to be seen, and the more likely that people will understand what they need to do, take appropriate reaction. The road users that are take appropriate reaction so that there's not an accident. So here's some examples of warning lights on work vehicles. They need to be turned on. They need to be in working condition. They need to be highly visible. It's important that you do these things properly. It's important that you check them. It's important that you do inspections. Make sure on your job briefing that you absolutely document the working condition of your lights and your vehicles, and make sure you mention that they need to be turned on. Work vehicle placement. It's another thing that's really important. You want to make sure that the vehicles are placed upstream of the work traffic to shield on-foot workers from the traffic. You need somewhat of a buffer zone there. You need to make sure that vehicles are warned of the upcoming work zone. You want to make sure trailers and other equipment appropriately are downstream of the work area so that they do not get hit by the road users, normal traffic. So anytime you interrupt the normal traffic pattern, you become responsible for everything that goes on in that work zone. So the mere fact that you're interrupting the traffic means you're responsible. You have a responsibility to the road users. You have a responsibility to workers that are in the work zone. You have a responsibility to make sure equipment is appropriately placed so that it is not a hindrance or create greater risk to either the motorist or the workers there. Improper placement of work vehicles, you can see from these pictures here. I would say that the people didn't give a whole lot of thought to where they placed these vehicles and how they set them up. Hopefully no one has done anything like this that's watching the video, but if you have, now you understand what you need to do to make the work zone a safer place. Devices upstream to identify hazardous conditions, to clearly communicate to road users what to expect. Trailers and other equipment that's not in the work zone need to be downstream on the back side of the work zone so that they do not create some kind of issue for either the road users or the workers. Road users or workers. There's a lot of people that are fall under that road user moniker. People driving vehicles, people driving semi-trucks, people that are pedestrians, walking around, bicyclists, motorcyclists. It covers a lot of people. So we want to make sure that we take all of those different road users and workers into consideration when we set up our work zone. Work vehicles not protected. You do not want vehicles outside of the termination area. Make sure that any work vehicle is located inside of the work zone, inside of the termination area. Of course, the termination area is where the work zone ends and normal traffic patterns pick up and become normal again. That's when the traffic pattern changes from what you have done in your work zone to the normal traffic pattern that's usually in that area. Worker safety and visibility. We've got to be concerned with personal visibility and personal safety. When we're talking about being exposed to traffic and being exposed to people that are driving vehicles, all kinds of vehicles, we have to make sure we protect the people that are in the work zone. You have to wear high visibility safety apparel at all times. As I've mentioned before, orange, yellow, green, fluorescent versions of those colors, they need to be clean. They need to be observable by the people that are road users, that are driving vehicles. You got to have retro reflective materials, not just on the cones, but on the Class 2 and Class 3 vest as well. It's really important. Now, I also want to say, not only do we need to make sure that our vest and our devices, our signs, our trucks, our high-intensity lights, all of that is clean and that it's working properly, we also need to realize that sometimes we get a little nonchalant in how we work in some of these work zones. And we need to be always aware that if you're going to step out from a vehicle that's located in the work zone or some other piece of equipment, it's the same thing as stepping out on the backside of a blind hill, a blind curve, or a shrub or a tree. So, not just making sure that all our devices are clean and operable, we have to make sure that our actions speak about our concern about safety. Same thing as sort of looking both ways before we cross the street. I'm sure all of us remember hearing that a lot as young people, children, and things like that. But it's really important in these situations. I'd love to tell you that all the road users are aware of everything that's going on around them, but there are so many distractions while people are driving. And so you have to do everything possible to lower your risk of a near miss or an accident happening, right? So worker safety apparel, there again, there are some proposed amendments to the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, or the MUTCD, talking about high visibility safety apparel as well as headwear. ANSI is involved in this, and the International Safety Equipment Association also. They talk about Class 2 and Class 3 garments based on worker activities. The time of day that you're out there is really important. They make all kinds of high visibility apparel. Of course, the Class 2 vest is missing the sleeves and missing a certain amount of area of the retroreflective bands. The Class 3 vest, which is the furthest on the right, has sleeves and extra retroreflective material on it. They also make headbands that go on hard hats that help with visibility. They also make pants or trousers, or however you want to describe that go on over your legs that add visibility also. So you need to make those decisions based on the time of day and how important it is for the road users to be able to see and observe workers and make sure they don't hit them. Make sure they don't hit them. It's important. Key points regarding utility work zone setup. The duration of the traffic alteration can allow for some alternate work zone setup. There again, we have to make sure we understand that the time that road workers, people who are utility workers that are exposed to traffic, they are at the greatest risk at setup and takedown of the traffic control devices and setting up the work zone. So if you're going to be there for a short duration where you're going to spend more time at risk setting up a work zone, there are some alternative things you can do using vehicles, high intensity lights, along with your high visibility apparel, that you can get good risk reduction for being exposed to traffic that's better than setting up a work zone. That's going to take some evaluation. You just don't want to say, hey, we can do this really quick and act like it's a shortcut. It's not a shortcut. It's a real consideration you have to think through about what's appropriate. There's going to be times when it's not appropriate to use an alternate work zone setup, and it's a case-by-case decision. You're going to have to think through some of these issues. The core principles must be met. Traffic notification being done early, direction information, and flow control termination. All this is to lower the risk both to workers as well as road users. Duration does not allow an exclusion of signs or flaggers if required for safety control traffic flow and meet the core principles. Cannot violate the core principles of protecting both road users and workers. Everyone's safety must be taken into consideration, and we have to do it correctly. So keep that in mind. It's really important that we don't use this idea as a shortcut. You start taking shortcuts and not carefully considering all the safety and all the risk involved, we end up in a bad way. So we don't want to look at it from that perspective. So keep that in mind. I appreciate you paying attention. I appreciate the work you do. I really do. I'm not going to name my local utilities, but I appreciate the water I receive and the electricity I receive and all that they do. I see them all the time out on the roads doing hard work. And I know you do the same hard work for the communities that you serve also. So don't take shortcuts. Carefully consider both the risk to you as well as the risk to the road users. And in all cases, please be safe. Please be safe. I appreciate, as I said before, your time. I appreciate you paying attention. If you have any questions, it's really important to us at JTNS that you ask us whatever questions you have regarding this presentation. Whoever your JTNS instructor is more than happy to answer any question you have. If we do not know the answer to the question, we will research it and get back to you with an answer. We're not all knowing or all seeing or anything else like that, but we want to make sure that we answer everything that you have or communicate any near misses that you may have had if you feel like sharing those with us, so that we can help other utilities avoid any kind of similar situations. Once again, thank you. Have a wonderful day, and until we see you next time. Bye.